Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Franka. This is the on-call simulator, and I'm going to talk about building an interactive game for teaching incident response. So effective on-call onboarding is really important for building observability, reliability teams. That process from teaching someone how to be on an on-call rotation doing incident response to when they get their first alert is just super vital for getting them on speed and for your overall team healthiness. So at Mapbox, we have a variety of on-call onboarding systems already in place, like buddy systems and bucket lists and checklists and alarm scrums. But there was sort of one part of this whole process that was missing. And that was a safe and low-stakes environment to practice these on-call triaging skills without the stress of an actual production incident. So it's really cool because we heard a lot about this morning already about good learning and learning how your learning is better in a low-stakes, safe place. So this is exactly where the idea of building a game comes in as well. So my name is Franka. I'm a platform engineer at Mapbox. I'm from Berlin. It was a pretty long flight to get here, but I made it. And I'm really interested in improving everyone's on-call experiences here. Clicker. So games and incident response, and not two topics that are necessarily really intuitively connected. So you might wonder why my instinct to approach this problem was to write a game. And to tell that story, I want to give a little bit of background on sort of my interest in game development and video games and stuff. So I didn't really grow up playing a lot of video games. Wasn't really that typical nerdy high school person. So I was kind of detached from that whole world. But then about a year ago, someone recommended this book to me. It's called The Rise of the Video Game Zinesters by Anna Anthropy, and it's really highly recommended to anyone who is interested in either making games or even just playing video games. And in this book, she talks a lot about how video games are really great media of art and a great way to share experiences with other people. And in this way, they're also a really great teaching tool because you can tell stories in a way that let other people actually experience those stories. And by sort of going through that thing of actually trying something yourself in a game, it's a much more effective tool of learning than just reading documentation or sort of passively looking at things. So in this book, she talks a lot about how all kinds of people you see here on the title, like freaks, normals, amateurs, queers, housewives, and people like you can make games. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can make a game too. So I started, this was one of my first games. It's called Sleepy Dog, and it's about a dog who's really hungry, but also really sleepy. And he's just trying to get to the food, but then keeps falling asleep while it's happening. And I made this in a day, and it was pretty exciting to see what you can do. I made another game, it's called Vegan Sandwiches. I actually, unfortunately, never finished this one. Maybe one day I will, but I'm a vegan, and sometimes it's really hard to find food that you can eat, so thought I would make a game about that experience. And then there's another one. This one I made with my partner. She's also a game developer. It's called The Mermaid Situation. And it's a point-and-click game where you're a mermaid stuck in this room. The sea's far away. You can see it in that little window. And yeah, you want to get out of that room. So yeah, this is sort of my background. I haven't really made the one big game, that's going to have my breakthrough, but I've enjoyed dabbling in this space and seeing what you can do. So also about a year ago, same kind of time frame, I joined Mapbox as a platform engineer. And Mapbox is a mapping and location data platform. So we have a lot of products around navigation, mapping, geocoding, and we also have iOS and Android SDKs for using apps or location services in your applications. We also have a Unity SDK, which means you can have maps in your games, which is pretty cool, but I haven't tried that yet. So the platform team at Mapbox is a group of about 10 people. Actually, 2 of us or 3 of us are giving talks here, which is pretty cool. But we sort of support the rest of these other application teams in maintaining the infrastructure that they run in, both in a physical sort of concrete way of supporting the actual clusters that they deploy their code into, but also supporting them in a way of like providing guidance through principles of reliability, being on a lot of on-call rotations for these systems, and so on. And we take on-call onboarding pretty seriously. And I want to really share that seriousness with you and hope to like inspire you to approach it the same way. Because I've heard a lot of stories of folks being like, here's your pager, it's your first day on call, like good luck. So I think on-call onboarding is really, really important, and there's a variety of reasons why. The first one is for your systems. Obviously, or very likely, your on-call rotation exists in order to ensure that healthiness and reliability of your systems. Whatever your actual standards or concrete sort of guidelines for reliability may be, likely you have on-call engineers to make sure that standard is adhered to. Any one person who is on this rotation must have enough like sort of background and knowledge and sound judgment to make decisions and actions that help achieve that guideline, right? So obviously by having that sound judgment, I don't mean that any one person on the rotation must be like senior enough to handle an entire outage by themselves. Quite the opposite. Oftentimes it's sort of a factor of good judgment if they know when to call in more hands, right? So it's more of a saying that any person on the rotation must have enough good judgment to say like, oh, this seems like bad enough, I should call in more people. Or like, oh, this seems like a bug in the system. They must have a certain standard of intuition and training to ensure the reliability you want for your system. For your team, so on our on-call rotation that I'm on right now, not right now in this moment, luckily, but right now in this time, there are about 6, 7 people, I think. And all of these people, I have really great trust that their work is like in the best interest in the system, and that they've been trained and onboarded really well to help achieve that. And I think this is really important to have that trust in your team. If there's one person who you know hasn't been trained or hasn't been onboarded, it can really impact the other people negatively. May it be by them not acknowledging incidents, therefore you get woken up because you're somewhere further along in that escalation hierarchy, or whether it's just about them making decisions that affect your work somehow negatively. So it's important for the rest of the team that onboarding is going well. And then, of course, for the most important person in this whole process, like the actual onboardee. If you've never been on call before, going on the on-call rotation for the first time is likely a really big step and moment in your career. It's a huge responsibility. It probably feels really scary. And so for this person to have that like knowledge that they've had enough training and they have experience and they feel well supported is incredibly important for their safety and for their learning. So lots of reasons to care about on-call onboarding. The first time I was on call, even though there was some, and this was at a previous job, even though there was some on-call processes, onboarding processes in place already, I still remember just kind of sitting on my couch and like refreshing graphs over and over again, even though there was no alert happening at all. I was just like paranoid, and I didn't have the trust that the alarms were set up well enough to actually alarm, and then I also didn't have the trust and experience in myself to know that I would wake up from an alarm. So I don't want anyone to have this kind of experience, and there wasn't even anything going on at this point. I was just worked up for no reason. So I quickly want to talk about the kinds of processes that we have in place for our on-call onboarding at the moment. The first one is buddy systems. So anyone who starts onboarding onto a rotation is assigned a buddy. And they stay with this buddy for the whole throughout process. This is our icon for container buddy. They're 2 little containers. So when you have this buddy, you go through 3 different phases from them. with them. The first phase being just kind of observing. You're watching your, the more experienced buddy. You're watching them do the incident response. You're sitting with them if you're in the same office. You're going to look at the same metrics and graphs that they're looking at. And you can try running whatever queries they're running. And this change, sort of throughout these phases, your responsibility increases until in the third phase, the person who's onboarding is expected to basically do the entire incident response with the more experienced buddy just watching along. Having these phases really clearly spelled out has a lot of benefits. One of them is that it's really clear to both the person who's onboarding and the mentor what your responsibilities are. It's clear that on your first day of being on call, you're not expected to actually do anything useful, basically. It's just, you're just supposed to learn. And it's right there in the description of the phase. It's like, just watch what your older buddy is doing. There's also an explicit handoff between each of these phases so that you know, okay, now we're moving on to the next stage. Of course, this may depend on the alarm and incident as well. It's likely that if you get something you've seen before, you can advance to a higher phase, whereas if there's a sort of much bigger event happening, it's likely you'll want to sit back a little bit more. Number 2 is onboarding bucket lists. So we have this concept of a bucket list. It's a little bit like a checklist that you're going through, and the goal is to measure, have some kind of idea of how far you're along on your process to being a fully onboarded member of the rotation. It's really hard to measure how much experience or how good someone is at incident response. So instead, what we've done is brainstormed a list of experiences that relate to being on call. And they're things like, they might be things like, oh, I got woken up by an alarm. That's not an achievement, or that's not, like a great thing you did, but it is part of the experience. And having gone through that experience says something about where you are in being a full member of the rotation. So this is my bucket list when I started out. It's almost filled out now, but yeah, there's still some stuff left. And there's a few categories in here as well to kind of indicate different items. The first one is you can do this at any time. So these are things like reading alarm documentation, getting really familiar with the kinds of investigation tools that we use, looking at different sort of monitoring metrics, or maybe improving our on-call documentation. This is something that's really useful to do. You can just do it whenever you have the free time and are interested in working on your onboarding. The next category is this depends on the weather. So weather being, you have to do this when there's an actual alert. So this could be something like the first time that you deployed a fix to a system, or the first time that you run a specific query in one of our querying systems. And the third categories are the gems. So these are pretty rare. There are things that happen in a more severe outage. So this might be something like updating the Mapbox status page or opening a support case with AWS. And the really cool thing about having these categories is that there's a really high culture of encouraging folks to help them check off things off their list. So for example, last time there was an incident, I think 2 weeks ago, where someone had to update the status page. And what happens in these scenarios is I'll look around or ask around, hey, is there someone here who hasn't checked this off their bucket list yet? And I will then guide this person through actually doing that themselves. So it really helps create these learning opportunities that you might not think to do this otherwise in this stressful situation. And then just quickly, alarm scrums. So we do daily alarm scrums. This is not necessarily an onboarding tool per se, but it does help also with onboarding new folks. Just talking about the alarms that came up the day before, what sort of triaging steps were involved. And it can really be helpful to also learn little tricks like, oh, I didn't know that you could run this specific query, or there's this sort of hidden button here in the AWS console that I didn't know about, which seems to happen fairly often. Yeah. So just quick recap, the systems we had in place before working on this game was the buddy systems, the bucket lists, and the alarm scrum. Right, so let's get back to the low-stakes environment. So I wrote this game. It's called the On-Call Simulator game, and I'm going to give you a quick demo. So your phone starts beeping. It's your PagerDuty ringtone. You turn off the TV and go to grab your phone. Kayla has triggered a platform alert. We're seeing upload API errors. Please help. So you open Slack and start reading back scroll. Let's see if someone posted a more detailed log of these error messages. User uploads is not authorized to perform ECS run task on resource uploads production US East 1. Sounds pretty bad. Yeah, and then you have some questions for Kayla to get a better sense of the impact of the errors. So it kind of lets you choose from different mitigating actions or questions that you can do, like a little text adventure games. So I'm gonna fast forward and go to this place where you start to think about mitigating actions. So there's it's a little bit too big, but there's a list of actions that you can choose. So I'm gonna try to roll back the change that Kayla deployed because I know from earlier that she recently deployed something, and maybe that's the cause of the errors. Kayla, could you roll back the stack update to the previous commit? Kayla says, yeah. I'm starting the uploads rollback now. You wait for a bit. Kayla, did your rollback go through? Still waiting on that. Kayla says, yeah, but I'm still seeing the same errors. So you're back where you started. Yeah, just to give you a little taste of that. So this is this game that takes you through one of our previous Mapbox incidents and yeah, just let you experience what happens with different situations. So maybe you want to try making something like this for one of your own past incidents. And here's the recipe for doing that. Number one, choose a tool like Twine. So I use Twine. Anna Anthropy recommended it in this book that I mentioned earlier. And Twine is a tool for making text adventure games with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And it's really easy to use, which is why I chose it. But there are tons of other game-making tools out there, and of course, many of you are engineers. You can also pick a game engine of your choice and write your own game or code your own game. This is what Twine looks like. It's a little storyboard where you have these things, like these little boxes for each frame. And it also shows you the visual flow of the conditionals throughout the game. So you can have conditions, branches. I think there's even variables that you can use, but I didn't really try that. And yeah, then there's these little text boxes that you can edit with the story. And they have this DSL, this little language inside of Twine that you can use. Number two, so once you have your tool ready and you're like, okay, I want to make a game, craft a story. So I started this process by looking through the folder of past postmortems from previous incidents that we've had and kind of choosing one that seemed interesting to me. So I started out with one, and it was a little bit hard to sort of follow along because while we had pretty detailed postmortems, there wasn't that much detail. So I decided to then use another incident which I had personally participated in responding to. So I kind of recommend choosing something that you were a part of, but maybe also you're better game writers than I am, and you can just pick up anything. So yeah, if you have detailed postmortems, those really help. But you can also just add more detail or use fiction. Rather than starting with a postmortem, perhaps you're also more creative, and you can just imagine the worst incident that could possibly hit your system, and just write that up from scratch. Also totally possible. Yeah, I found that adding little details of the storyline helps a lot to engage the player too. And then finally, iterate and get feedback. It's all great, writing games in your home or doing that, but of course, if you want people to actually play them and learn from them, which is the ultimate goal of this project, then getting feedback in order to improve the experience is really important. So I finished this game, and then I sent it to a few of my coworkers to try and get their feedback. And the first question I asked them was, what did you find, what made it feel like a real incident, and what made it feel fake to you? And the first person I chatted with, she's actually in the audience. She said, "It's super well written. Nothing felt fake about it." And I was really excited. I was like, "Oh my god, this is great! Like first version of the game feels totally real, awesome." And then I asked the same question to another user or another coworker, and asked her to play the exact same game. And her response was, "It didn't feel like a real incident to me." So I was like, "Oh no, what happened?" But yeah, of course, like no surprise, humans are really different, and people learn really differently. The reason this didn't feel like a real incident to her, like she explained in the more detailed feedback, was that there weren't any visuals in my game. It was purely text-based. And she is a really visual learner. It's like one trying to understand incidents. She often, of course, looks at graphs and metrics like any of us do, but having those visual aids really helps her like sort of conceptualize what's going on. And I didn't have that in the game yet. So that was like a critical piece of feedback, but it's actually really easy to add images to my game. So just an example of why this kind of getting feedback process is really important to make the game an effective tool for your whole team. All right, so quick recipe recap. Number 1, choose a tool. I really recommend Twine because it's great and easy to use. Also open source. Then craft a story, and then iterate and get feedback. So future goals for this project. The first one I wrote is very Mapbox-based, so I didn't, it's not public yet. But I hope to write more games and then also open source some of them. Empower and encourage other folks to try their own. I would really like to add this as the last step on our On-Call onboarding bucket list. Like, imagine every person who is onboarding to On-Call has to then, at the end of their process, like write a game about one incident that they responded to. I think that would be super cool. And yeah, just
do it for real.
Encourage more folks to try different ideas with your onboarding and take it really seriously. So maybe try it out, make your own Twine On-Call game, get really creative, and yeah, thank you so much.